guys, and welcome back to Hilltop Farm. Today I'm going to be presenting a special for you on canning. I'm going to take you right through everything from how I discovered canning right through to the goods you can can, and how to use your canner and how to maintain it and look after it. Okay, living in Australia, we've never been exposed to canning here, not to my knowledge. I can remember as a child my mother and my aunt, my grandmother, sitting round the kitchen table cutting up peaches and putting those in jars that they, in hindsight, would have water bathed, although I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. And they just called it, they were either preserving or bottling fruit. And that was the only thing I'd ever heard of. Never heard of anything different. Some years back, I actually volunteered for an online group, and we were a support network for families of the victims of crime. We were sort of allotted people. I was allotted a woman whose daughter was missing. She and I became quite close over a period of 2 or 3 years, and we chatted all the time. And I can remember having a conversation with her one day where we were talking about, our dreams, our goals for the future, where you'd like to be in 5 years, 10 years, that kind of thing. And I happened to tell her how I'd love to be self-sufficient, grow my own fruit and vegetables, have chickens and a pig and a goat and all that sort of thing. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, you mean homesteading?" And I said, "Homesteading? Well, what's homesteading?" And she said, "Well, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, getting back to basics and being self-sufficient and that sort of thing." A term that I had never heard of. I'd heard of homesteaders, but I thought that was something that happened in the, out in the Wild West in the US a few hundred years back. I hadn't heard of it in modern times. But anyway, after that, I got on the computer and I Googled homesteading, and of course, site after site after site came up. And I started reading up about it. And it wouldn't matter whether I was reading blogs or watching other YouTube channels, they kept making reference to this canning. And it was obvious that they were talking about their excess beans, excess of beans were going to be canning this weekend. And I, in my mind, canning is a tin can that your baked beans and things come from in the supermarket. So I thought they had this whiz-bang gadget that was a tin can, and somehow you put your produce into it and you had some gadget for sealing a lid on top of the tin can, and you just open it with a can opener. That's what I thought canning was all about. But of course, the more I looked into it and the more YouTube channels I watched, I discovered that it was what we call preserving, what we call bottling. But there was a difference, you see. Whereas we would bottle or preserve jams and fruits in a water bath canner, this canning took things to a whole different level, because they pressure canned, and you could take chicken, cut it up, and preserve it for months at a time, years at a time, in fact. And it's perfectly safe to eat. I must confess, when I first heard about it, there was no way I was going to try anything with meat in it. It looked absolutely disgusting. And I thought, there is no way you are going to get me to eat that. Until I realised that when you cut up your meat and you chuck it into, say you're doing a chicken fillet, you cut it up and you chuck it in the fry pan and cook it. Before you add anything else, that's what you've got here. So this is basically just meat that you put in the frying pan and you've cooked. So you take it out of there, put it in the frying pan and warm it up. And it's at that stage. You then start adding your ingredients. And once I started looking at it like that, and realising that the traditional canning that I'm used to is a can so you can't see the contents, but in fact this is what it looks like inside, then I was able to get on with it and get past it. And now, the look of it doesn't bother me. I'm perfectly alright with it. But that's how I discovered canning. Then I had the problem of, where do I find this in Australia? Because our major department stores sell, strangely enough, some of the tools like funnels and bottle jar lifters, things like that, and some of the jars, although not a very wide range, and they are ridiculously expensive. But they don't sell the canners. And so they're obviously dealing with people that, like every other Australian, water bath canners. So, again, hit trusty Google, and I discovered that you could buy canners through eBay. And if you really hunted, there were not just canners through eBay, but canners in Australia through eBay. So I bought one. And it arrived. It was all terribly exciting. But when it arrived, I discovered that the address that it had come from wasn't a private seller. It was a company. And so I looked up that company online. And lo and behold, the company is called Ozfarmers. And they're right here in Australia. Now, most of what they have is more expensive than the US. But of course, it's got to be imported. But they have a wide range of the jars. They have the spare lids. They have the canners themselves. They have all the accessories to go with it. So that was brilliant. And what I shall do is I don't know how many episodes this is going to take up. 2, possibly even 3, depends on how long it all ends up in the end. But on each one I will leave a link to Ozfarmers for those of you in Australia. And they possibly will ship to New Zealand, but I don't know. I'd have to look into that. But if you're a subscriber in New Zealand, contact them, because you may well find they will send to you, and it may be cheaper than the US. So those links will be in the description below. Now, through the course of this series of specials, if you have any questions, either leave them in the comments below, or if you go into our channel's homepage and click on About, I think it's About, it'll tell you a bit about us, and there's a contact email address to get through to Hilltop Farm directly. So any questions, doesn't matter how silly you think it sounds, because believe me, I've had some silly questions and I've had no one to ask. So yeah, you ask away and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Okay, now people say to me, well, what sort of thing can you can? It's pretty well limited by your imagination. It really is. You can, if you want to, you can make up a big pot of soup. Depending on the size of your family, whether you can go for the half pint, which could be an individual serve, which is sort of that size there. You might want to go for a pint, which might do a couple of people. Quart, whatever. You pick your size jar, but you could make a big batch of soup and can it purely and simply for convenience. So you could have half a dozen, whatever, jars of your favourite tomato soup or pea and ham soup or whatever it happens to be on the shelf at any one time. Okay, so you could do it for that. You could even make up casseroles, curries, anything like that. I wouldn't recommend putting anything like rice or pasta in its cooked form in them, because they just swell and go mushy with all the liquid that's in there. But your actual base, you could, for example, put a bolognese sauce in one, which means for convenience you've just got to grab a jar off the shelf, cook your pasta and pour it on. Well, heat up your jar and pour it on. So you can use it for things like that. Or you can use it for raw ingredients. You can either do what a lot of homesteaders do and wait until there's an absolute glut in their garden and there's too much to eat, and rather than have it spoil, they will can it for later on in the season when it's not available. Things like tomatoes. I know here at Hilltop and a lot of other homesteads will deliberately grow more tomatoes than you need, because tomato is something, like tomato base is something you can use all year round in Italian stuff, Mexican stuff, curries, casseroles, I mean, you name it, you can use it all year round. So rather than limit yourself, if you just basically can the tomatoes, then you've just got them on hand. So you grow a load so that you end up with, 20, 30, 40, however many you think you'll need, 50 quarts in your pantry. And everyone falls to bits and they sort of say, why do you want 40 jars of tomatoes in your pantry? And it's because, well, for about 12 weeks of the year they're fresh on the vine and I don't need them. And for the other 40 weeks, one meal a week. That's all I've got in that jar, just one meal a week. So although it looks a lot, between seasons, it actually isn't. And this is what you have to think about. You might be canning beans, for example. Now, you might can these beans here, and you've decided, okay, there's just 2 of us, that's enough for 2 meals for 2 of us. Alright? But if you're going to have beans twice a week with your meal, you work out, okay, well, they're fresh on the vines out there for 12 weeks. But the other 40 weeks, I'm going to need a jar every week for those 40 weeks just to get us through. And that's what you do. Now, one thing my family's had to get their head around is we've always been used to fresh beans, for example. And let's face it, I'm not going to kid you, these do not taste like fresh beans, because they're not. They're canned beans. The same as when you were a kid, you went camping and you had canned beans out of a can when you were camping. That's what they taste like. But if you just see how they grow beans commercially for city dwellers now, It's in a factory. There's no greenhouses, well, not how you and I used to know them when we were kids. They're in a factory, air conditioned, heated and cooled. There's no soil. They're all suspended on bits of wire, hanging in troughs of water that have chemicals flowing through them. And that's what we call fresh beans. Well, we might be used to the taste of them, but they're anything but fresh. These little guys, they might not be fresh off the vine, but they're fresh out of the garden. And I know what that garden was fertilised with. I know if it's been sprayed with anything, which it hasn't. Right? And once they hit this jar, I know that rainwater topped it up. And I know if anything was added to that rainwater. Okay? In the case of these, there was a little bit of salt added. But that's okay. I put it in. I made that decision. And I put it in and I know how much is in there. It's the same with my carrots. I'm not a huge carrot fan. I think I'm the only one in the house that's not. But that's alright. I'll still eat them. But with carrots, we can these up. And we know where they've come from. We know what went into the soil. We know what everything was sprayed with. And when these go in here, they go in with rainwater. And in the case of carrots, rather than put salt in, we put, probably in something like that, probably half a teaspoon of sugar. Because sugar helps them along. Okay? And just to make life easier, with a product like carrot, we can them up. These ones here, these are our whole carrots, because when we have a roast, we like to have roast carrot. So they go in whole. These ones, they're our sliced carrots. And they're the ones, obviously, that we use if we want sliced carrots. Now this one, that's finely diced carrot. Now that one we use if we're having a bolognese sauce or something where we want the flavour but not chunks of carrot. We pretty much want it to break down, and that's the one we use for that. So, one, when you've got 100 weight of carrots, it makes it a little less boring when you've got 3 different ways you have to cut them up when you're processing them at that end. And it makes life so much easier when you're ready to put them on the shelf, to put them in your recipe at the cooking end. Okay, so that's probably about enough for today. I've given you quite enough to think about. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below or go to our channel's page and click on About, and you'll find the email address to Hilltop Farm down there, and you can email me directly. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you found it informative. Do join us for the next instalment. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share us on social media. So until next time, it's goodbye from Hilltop Farm. See ya!